The sun cast a soft golden light over the quiet American town. It was the kind of morning where even the wind moved gently, brushing over old brick buildings and empty sidewalks. Outside a small cafe on Main Street, Marcus sat at a corner table, sipping his coffee in silence. His two dogs rested at his feet, a golden retriever with kind, gentle eyes, and a black and tan Doberman that sat alert, almost like a soldier on duty. Marcus wore a plain dark t-shirt, jeans, and a navy cap pulled low. His skin was dark, his eyes calm. The town had seen him every morning for years, always at the same time, same table, same quiet demeanor. Some greeted him with nods. Others passed by without a word. Not everyone liked that a black man owned the respect of half the town just by showing up. But no one said it out loud. From a distance, the low rumble of engines began to echo between the buildings. People turned their heads. A biker gang rolled into town, their motorcycles growling like thunder. They weren't locals. Leather jackets, loud music, and the smell of exhaust filled the air as they parked right outside the cafe. At the front of the group was Rick, tall, broad, with a beard that looked like it hadn't seen soap in months. He stepped off his bike like he owned the place, slapping his boot against the pavement, scanning the street like a wolf eyeing a flock. The townspeople stiffened. Conversations stopped. A woman hurried her child inside the bakery across the road. An old man dropped his paper just to get a better look. But Rick wasn't watching them. His eyes landed on Marcus and his dogs. "Well, what do we have here?" Rick said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at that, a pair of royal mutts, sipping coffee with the help." His gang laughed. It wasn't a real joke, but they laughed anyway. Not because it was funny, because Rick needed them to. Marcus didn't move. He looked down, gently patted the golden retriever's head. Rick tilted his head, walked closer, boots stomping across the wood deck of the cafe. "These your dogs, boy?" he asked, leaning in, voice sharp with something that wasn't quite curiosity. Marcus looked up once, calmly. Said nothing. Rick smirked. "They look like they eat better than my crew," he chuckled. Then, without warning, he raised his boot and kicked the golden retriever right in the side. The dog yelped and stumbled back, eyes wide with pain and confusion. The Doberman shot to its feet, muscles tensed, growling low, but staying by Marcus's side. The entire street went silent. A waitress gasped inside the cafe. A woman across the road dropped her phone. A little boy clutched his ice cream so hard it melted through his fingers. Rick laughed. "Relax, it's just a dog." But inside the cafe, behind the window where the sunlight had been streaming in just moments before, a figure had stopped mid-sip. Jason Statham set his tea down, slowly, gently, and stared through the glass at Rick. His expression didn't change, not even a blink. But the air inside the cafe shifted like a storm cloud had just formed. Someone whispered, "Oh no," because Jason had seen everything. Marcus didn't say a word after the kick. His hand rested gently on the Doberman's head, calming him with just a single touch. His golden retriever limped slightly, whining softly, but didn't bark or growl. It was like both dogs had been trained not just to obey, but to trust their owner even in pain. The street was still frozen. Some people were waiting for Marcus to explode, to shout, to throw a punch. But he didn't. He just sat there, quiet, steady, eyes lowered, as if he'd seen worse, as if this wasn't the first time someone had disrespected him. Because it wasn't. Marcus had lived in that town for years. He had been a Navy man once, deployed more times than he could count. After serving his country, he'd settled in this small place where life was slow and simple. He bought a modest home at the edge of town and adopted the 2 dogs from a shelter. People never asked why he lived alone, but if you looked closely, you could tell he had stories. Some scars are silent. Every morning, he walked both dogs before sunrise. Then came to this cafe, ordered the same black coffee, and sat quietly by the window. He didn't speak much, but everyone knew him. To some in town, he was that quiet black guy with the perfect dogs. To others, he was a symbol, a man who didn't ask for attention but still commanded respect. Kids waved at him, shopkeepers nodded. The barber always asked if he needed anything. But behind the polite smiles, there were always a few looks. The kind that lingered just a second too long. The kind that said, "You don't belong here. Not really." Marcus had learned to ignore it. After years in uniform, after orders barked at him in deserts and seas, he'd come to understand one thing. Not every battle is worth fighting. But today, something was different. Today, his dog had been kicked in public. And he had done nothing. Was it weakness? It was control. The Doberman sat beside him, breathing heavy. The golden retriever had its head down, tail curled beneath it. Marcus leaned forward, whispered something only the dogs could hear. Both immediately sat down again. Disciplined. Loyal. Like soldiers at attention. From the side of the road, a teenager whispered to his friend, "Why's he not doing anything?" Because Marcus knew better. He had seen what happened when black men stood up for themselves in the wrong places. He had seen how quickly the world turned on you, even when you were right. He had buried friends who were just trying to be heard. So instead, he waited. The biker gang chuckled, uneasy now. Rick was still grinning, but even he could feel something had shifted. The laughter didn't echo the same. The crowd wasn't laughing with him. And Marcus, he wasn't reacting the way Rick expected. Marcus leaned back in his chair, calm, hands in his lap. No anger, no fear, just patience. And just inside the cafe window, Jason Statham stood up. The wind picked up slightly, brushing the flags that lined the storefronts. The town didn't move, didn't breathe. Jason didn't speak. He didn't even look at Marcus. But he had seen enough. Rick didn't know it yet, but something was coming. Slow, quiet, and unstoppable. Because Marcus might not have fought back, but someone else was about to. Inside the cafe, everything had gone still. The hum of casual conversation had died the moment that boot made contact with the retriever's ribs. Dishes sat untouched, and forks hovered mid-air. Waitstaff froze behind the counter. Everyone felt it. Something was wrong. Jason Statham sat at a small corner table by the window. Sunlight poured in, lighting up the steam rising from his tea. He had arrived quietly that morning, just another traveler passing through. No fanfare, no camera flashes, just a man with a strong face and silent presence. He was halfway through his cup when the dog yelped. The sound cut through the quiet like a blade. Jason's hand, holding the cup mid-sip, stopped. He didn't blink. His jaw didn't move, but his eyes, they locked onto something outside the window, sharp and still. The golden retriever had stumbled back, pain written all over its soft brown eyes. The Doberman was already upright, still beside its owner, alert but waiting. And the black man, the one Jason had noticed earlier, sat quietly at the center of it all, calm even now. Rick stood just a few feet away, arms out like it was all a joke. His gang looked unsure, laughter fading into awkward shuffles and half-smiles. Jason's hand lowered slowly. The cup touched the saucer with a soft, deliberate clink. The cafe owner, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a white apron, noticed. He took a nervous step closer, wiping his hands on a towel. Jason didn't look at him. His gaze remained outside. The owner leaned in slightly and whispered, "Sir, I think that guy just made a huge mistake." Jason didn't reply. He didn't need to. A waitress behind the counter mouthed the words, "Oh my God." One of the younger customers was already filming through the window, camera trembling in his hands. The shift in energy wasn't loud. It was quiet, but deep, like the moment before thunder cracks. People could feel it in their chests, the kind of silence that presses on your ribs and makes you sit up straighter without knowing why. Jason stood up. No rush. No noise. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve and stepped around the table. The boots on his feet made a slow, steady sound against the wooden floor. Tap, tap, tap. Someone at the front of the cafe moved aside without being asked. Jason's presence wasn't the type that needed announcement. It carried weight without volume. He reached the door, paused for half a second, then opened it. The small bell above the frame jingled once, delicate, almost ironic, as if the universe itself was mocking the peace that had just been shattered. Outside, the biker gang had gone quiet. Rick was still trying to laugh it off, but even he could feel something had shifted. His smirk twitched, just for a second. A muscle in his jaw clenched. One of his men muttered, "Hey, Rick." Jason stepped out, sunlight hitting him like a spotlight. His shadow stretched long across the pavement. He didn't look left or right, just forward. His eyes never left Rick. The townspeople weren't moving. Even the ones who had stepped outside now stood frozen, watching. Not out of fear, but out of curiosity. They knew Jason wasn't just some celebrity passing through. He was something else. A woman near the post office whispered, "Is that?" Another responded, "It's him." Rick turned slowly, confused at first, then wary. He squinted against the sun. "Can I help you, mate?" Jason didn't answer. He kept walking. Slow, steady. And for the first time that day, Rick's feet began to shift. Not in confidence, but in discomfort. Jason stopped 5 feet in front of him. He didn't raise his voice, didn't reach for a weapon. He just stared. And in that single moment, Rick finally realized he wasn't the most dangerous man in town. Rick blinked. He wasn't used to being stared at like that, especially not by someone who wasn't afraid. His smirk hung on his face like a costume that no longer fit. His boots shifted slightly on the concrete. His voice tried to find confidence again. "Look, man, it was just a dog. Chill." Jason didn't move. Behind them, the street was dead silent. Cars idled. Storefront doors remained cracked open, the owners halfway out, not wanting to miss what came next. "You hear me?" Rick asked again, voice louder now. "It was just a little tap. You acting like I shot the damn thing." Jason took one slow step forward. Rick's chest rose. His arms crossed in defense, then dropped again like he wasn't sure what to do with them. "You kicked my dog," Jason said, voice flat but thick with weight. His accent wasn't harsh. It was cold, controlled. Rick scoffed, trying to brush it off. "Mate, you're acting like I killed your goldfish." Jason didn't blink. "He's not just a dog. He's family." The gang behind Rick wasn't laughing anymore. One of them looked toward his bike, clearly debating whether to get on and leave. The others stayed rooted, unsure if stepping back would make them look weak or smart. Marcus still sat at the table, calm, one hand on the retriever's back, the other resting on his knee. His face didn't show relief. Not yet. Just patience. Rick tried again. Come on, man. What, are you gonna teach me a lesson now? That it? Big action hero moment? Jason tilted his head slightly, studying him. You sure you want that? He asked, voice low, deadly quiet. Rick's jaw clenched. You think I'm scared of you? Jason didn't respond. Instead, he closed the gap with a step so smooth it barely registered before Rick's legs left the ground. Jason had swept one foot behind the other, catching Rick off balance. The biker landed hard on his back with a loud thud, dust puffing from the pavement. His head hit the concrete with a hollow echo. The town gasped. A waitress from the cafe dropped her tray again. This time, no one even noticed. Rick groaned, blinking up at the sky like it had betrayed him. Jason didn't follow up with a punch. He didn't say a word. He just stood over him, arms at his sides, calm and steady like a wall of stone. Rick's hand curled into a fist. He pushed himself up, shaking the dizziness from his head. His pride was louder than his pain. You got lucky, he muttered, brushing off his jacket. Try that again. Jason didn't try again. He moved. This time it was faster. Rick barely raised his arms before Jason stepped in, grabbed his wrist, twisted, and sent him spinning. The biker stumbled sideways and crashed into a parked table, sending coffee cups flying. People watching winced. One woman muttered, "Oof, that had to hurt." Rick stumbled back up, wild-eyed. Dirt clung to his beard. His face burned red with humiliation. His gang didn't move. Not one of them stepped forward. Not even the one who had called him boss a few minutes ago. Jason remained still. Not a hair out of place. Not a breath wasted. Still funny? He asked softly. Rick didn't answer. He only stared, chest heaving. Jason stepped forward again. Just once. No threat. No raised fists. Rick took a half step back without thinking. His foot dragged on the pavement. He was losing. And he knew it. But he couldn't stop. He pulled a small knife from the inside of his jacket, the kind meant to intimidate, not protect. The blade gleamed under the sun. Jason looked at it once, then at Rick. You really want to go there? He said, voice like a warning in the dark. Rick lunged, fast. But Jason was faster. With a pivot that barely looked like effort, he caught Rick's wrist mid-air, twisted it once, and the knife hit the ground with a metallic clatter. Jason didn't let go. He leaned in close, his grip tight, his voice low. That's how it feels, he said, to be helpless. Rick's eyes twitched. Jason released him. Rick stumbled back, cradling his wrist, sweat now shining on his forehead. The knife stayed on the ground between them. Jason didn't pick it up. Didn't need to. The street didn't breathe. Everyone watching knew this wasn't about the dog anymore. It was about power, and Rick had just lost his. Rick backed away, cradling his wrist, chest heaving like he'd just run a mile. His face had changed. That cocky biker grin had melted into something else. Panic. Shame. Rage mixed with disbelief. He looked down at the knife on the pavement. It wasn't far. He could still grab it. But his hand wouldn't move. Behind him, his gang had stopped pretending to be amused. They stood frozen, uncertain whether to step in or walk away. Some looked down. Others avoided Jason's eyes entirely. And then there was Marcus, still seated, still calm. He hadn't moved an inch. The retriever now sat close by his leg, tail curled, chest rising with steady breaths. The Doberman stood next to the chair, ears perked, watching everything without a growl. They trusted Jason, and so did Marcus. Jason turned his head toward Rick. "You still want to laugh?" he asked. His tone wasn't angry. There was no shouting, no barking commands, just the calm control of a man who didn't have to raise his voice to silence a room. Rick swallowed hard. His hand hovered in the air for a moment before dropping. People on the sidewalks were whispering now. A few of them had phones out, recording. Others just stared. No one was cheering. Not yet. The tension hadn't cracked enough for relief. They were still waiting to see how it would end. Rick's pride twitched in his throat. "You think this is over?" he snapped. "You think this is done? Just 'cause you're some tough guy with a movie face?" Jason took a slow breath. "I don't care what you think." Rick's lip curled. "You want to act like a big man? Fight fair. None of that wrist twist crap. Let's see if you can stand toe-to-toe." Jason didn't flinch. "You already had your chance." Rick growled and lunged again. No weapon this time, just fists and fury. Jason sidestepped. Quick, clean. He didn't punch. He didn't even shove. He stepped forward, leaned his shoulder into Rick's chest, and turned, redirecting all of Rick's force into the air behind him. Rick stumbled so hard, he nearly flipped over the edge of the patio railing and crashed onto the street. Gasps broke out. Even someone from his gang let out a shocked, "Damn!" Jason looked at the townspeople now, just briefly. His eyes scanned faces. They weren't afraid. They weren't concerned. They were watching justice, and that's exactly what it felt like. One of the older bikers stepped forward, voice low. "Rick, man, let it go." Rick wheezed, trying to stand again, hand pressed to his ribs. Jason finally took a step toward Marcus. He didn't speak to him, just gave a small nod. Marcus looked back, eyes steady, face unreadable. But something shifted in that look. Something heavy and real. Two men who didn't need words to understand each other. Jason turned back to Rick one last time. "Go home," he said. "You're not built for this." Rick's hand twitched. Jason added, quieter now. "And next time you think about picking on someone smaller than you, think again." Rick's face flushed with anger. His eyes bounced between the knife, the dogs, Jason, and his own gang. But no one moved. No one was behind him anymore. They weren't with him. Not after this. The retriever let out a small whimper and nudged closer to Marcus. Marcus leaned down, brushing his fingers across the dog's back. It wasn't just a pet. It was family, loyalty, history, and pain. Jason walked past Rick, slow and casual, like nothing had happened. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He didn't even turn his head to check if Rick would try anything. Because he didn't need to. Power had already changed hands. Rick stood alone in the center of the street, sweat dripping from his forehead, breath shaky, arms hanging loose. No one clapped. No one booed. Just silence. The kind that stays in your bones. Across the way, a teenager said softly, "He didn't even hit him. He just folded him." Someone else replied, "That's real strength." The golden retriever wagged its tail once. Jason reached the cafe door, opened it, and walked back inside. Not a word. Not a glance back. He had already said everything that needed to be said. And Rick knew it. Jason didn't stay outside. He didn't wave to the crowd or stand around for thanks. He just stepped back through the cafe door like it was any other day. The bell above the entrance gave its soft jingle again, but this time it sounded like punctuation, like an ending. Inside, the tension had lifted, but no one moved yet. A few people turned in their seats, eyes following him. He walked past tables and returned to the one near the window where his tea still sat, barely touched. He didn't pick it up. Outside, the town was still shifting. People were stepping out of stores now. Quiet conversations had started. The energy had changed. Lighter, calmer, like a summer storm had passed and left everything cleaner. Marcus finally stood up. He reached down and gently clipped the leash onto the retriever's collar. The dog leaned against his leg, still a little shaky. The Doberman didn't need a command. It moved beside Marcus with trained precision. The man who had been kicked at, laughed at, ignored, now walked across the sidewalk with more presence than anyone else in town. He didn't look at Rick. He didn't need to. Rick stood off to the side, barely holding himself upright. His gang had backed away completely, acting like they weren't with him at all. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They just watched the man they once followed lose everything without a single punch from his own hands. Marcus walked toward the cafe steps. Jason didn't get up. He didn't speak. He simply watched him approach. For a brief moment, the two men locked eyes. No drama, no fanfare, just respect. Marcus gave a small nod, not one of thanks, not of relief, just understanding. It was the kind of gesture shared between people who had seen too much, lost too much, survived too much to waste words. Jason nodded back. Just once. The cafe owner finally stepped forward, wiping his hands on his apron. "You okay?" he asked Marcus, voice low and genuine. Marcus looked down at the retriever, scratched behind its ears, then glanced back up. "He'll be fine." The owner gave a breath of relief. "I'm glad." Across the street, a little girl holding her father's hand stared wide-eyed at Marcus's dogs. "Daddy, those are the dogs the man kicked," she whispered. Her father nodded. "And they're okay now." The girl smiled. Jason sat still, watching the sidewalk through the window. In his mind, he wasn't in a cafe anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere farther back in time. He had seen men like Marcus before, quiet, disciplined, brave. Men who carried more pain in silence than others did through war. He remembered them from missions, from bases overseas, from those moments in combat when noise faded and decisions had to be made in seconds. And in all those memories, the quiet ones were always the strongest. Outside, Marcus turned, ready to leave. Rick didn't say a word. His face was pale now, shoulders slumped, defeated. He didn't apologize, but he didn't challenge anything either. The cafe owner walked back inside, shaking his head as he passed Jason. "I don't think they'll be coming back here," he muttered. Jason gave the faintest smile. "Let's hope not," he said quietly. A teenager with a phone still filming whispered to his friend, "Did you see that? That guy didn't even raise his voice, and the biker backed down like a scared puppy." "That's what happens when you mess with the wrong person," the friend replied, "especially in the wrong town." Marcus walked toward the park at the end of the block, both dogs at his side. People watched him go, some nodding, some just following his steps with their eyes. He didn't look back, because he didn't need validation. He had stayed calm. He had stayed steady. And someone else had made the world listen for him. Rick sat on the edge of the sidewalk now, legs stretched, arms heavy in his lap. He didn't talk, didn't argue. He just stared at the concrete like it had the answers he couldn't find. His gang stood awkwardly nearby, pretending not to know him. They weren't waiting for him. They were waiting for a chance to leave without making eye contact. The golden retriever lay at Marcus's feet now, ears perked, but body relaxed. The Doberman watched the street like a sentry, still alert. But the tension was gone, like even the dogs knew the danger had passed. The engine of Rick's bike clicked in the heat as it cooled, like it too was out of breath. Jason stood from his table. The cafe owner had brought him a fresh cup of tea. He didn't ask for it, but it was placed quietly in front of him with a small nod of appreciation. Jason didn't drink it. He looked out the window again. Rick finally pushed himself to his feet. Not with pride, just because he didn't want to stay sitting any longer. He moved slowly toward his bike. The townspeople watched, still silent. Jason opened the cafe door and stepped outside one last time. His boots echoed like they had before, but this time they didn't feel like a warning. They felt like a statement. Rick paused near his motorcycle. Jason spoke. Calm. Measured. "Next time," he said, "think before you try to prove how tough you are." Rick didn't answer, didn't turn around. He just grabbed the handlebars, climbed on the seat, and started the engine. The rest of the bikers followed without a word. The roar of their bikes wasn't loud this time. It wasn't defiant. It sounded like retreat, like defeat in steel and rubber. As they rode out of town, no one waved. No one shouted. They just watched the dust settle. Jason turned to walk back inside, but before he did, he looked down the street toward Marcus, who was just reaching the edge of the park. Marcus turned his head slightly. Not all the way, just enough. Jason gave him a subtle nod, the kind shared between men who don't need to explain themselves, and Marcus smiled. It wasn't big, it wasn't dramatic, but it said everything. Back at the cafe, a small boy tugged at his mother's arm, then ran forward and knelt beside the golden retriever. "Is your dog okay?" he asked, looking up at Marcus with big, honest eyes. Marcus crouched beside the dog, gave a gentle scratch behind its ears. "Yeah," he said softly. "He's okay now." The boy smiled and hugged the retriever. The dog licked his face and wagged its tail. Jason stood a few steps away, watching. The tension in his shoulders finally loosened. The cafe owner leaned in again, voice low. "That was something else." Jason glanced at him. "Some people think strength is about making noise." The owner raised an eyebrow. "And what do you think it is?" Jason looked back at Marcus, who was now walking away down the tree-lined path, the leash in one hand, his dogs walking proudly at his side. "I think real strength," Jason said, "is knowing when to stand up and when to just stay standing." The cafe owner let out a breath. "Well, you gave this town a story it won't forget." Jason gave a tiny smirk. "That wasn't the goal." "Maybe not," the owner said, "but it happened anyway." Jason walked back toward the cafe. As he reached the steps, the Doberman looked back one more time, locked eyes with him, then continued walking beside Marcus. The town didn't go back to normal right away. People lingered. They talked quietly, replaying every second of what had just unfolded. But the message was clear. Not all men shout. Not all justice comes from the system. And not every fight is fought with fists. Sometimes the strongest voices are the quietest ones. As the sun dipped lower over the rooftops, Jason sat back at his table, finally lifting his cup. And somewhere down that long street, Marcus and his dogs disappeared into the calm. But no one in that town would ever forget what they witnessed that day. Because a man tried to prove his power by kicking a black man's dog, and learned the hard way that true power doesn't bark. It watches. It waits. And when the time comes, it doesn't miss.